So good morning and welcome everybody to Represent PA's August breakfast briefing. Represent PA is the only organization in Pennsylvania that is solely dedicated to supporting pro-choice Democratic women that are running for the state house and the state Senate. And every month we host these online briefings where we cover different topics related to the state legislature. Today, we are talking about the new Pennsylvania budget, and I am thrilled with our guests that we have joining us that are going to dig into the new budget. We have Speaker Joanna McClinton and then the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Policy Center, Felicity Williams. I will more formally introduce them to you in just a moment, but I wanted to give everyone a quick update on where we Represent PA, where we're at in our mission this cycle of supporting women running for the Pennsylvania General Assembly. So far this cycle, and this is including last week, we met as a full endorsement committee to release additional funds. We have invested just over $500,000, $552,500 into 57 women running across the Commonwealth. And that's split fairly evenly, about 25 or so incumbents, and the remaining are challengers. Since 2014, when we got started, we have invested now well over $2.5 million. So you can see this cycle, we've, a fairly large percentage of what we've invested since we began. Now, this cycle presents a really exciting and unique opportunity because more districts are in play and we have a lot of women running. Historically speaking, when one party holds the US House, the US Senate, and the presidency, what that means for the other party is there's generally that party is going to pick up seats. It's not a guarantee, but we have had a glimpse into what November could look like based on last Tuesday's special election results, where Brandon Dukes, a Democrat in House District 12, won a House seat that went to Trump by 18 points. For us, this is very exciting, right? It's so you think, oh my goodness, we had these seats that we considered the most likely to flip, and now we have these additional expansion seats that could win. But the flip side of that is that more people, more women in our case, need our support. And because for Represent PA, we are often candidate's single largest donor, especially in that bucket of expansion seats, we really have the opportunity to have a big impact on whether or not some of these women are going to win. And we do have this chance to now expand what is a 2-seat majority in the House and flip the Senate, all while sending more women to Harrisburg. So extremely exciting, but we really have our work cut out for us. So while we're off to a good start, we really aren't done. It's not time, to go home and just wait for the election results to roll in. We've got to continue helping our candidates, continue investing our money. All of our partner organizations really across the board are feeling the same thing we are. We're excited, but also saying, okay, where is all this extra funding going to come from? So just wanted to share that. We know that women continue to face barriers when they step up to run for office, in particular financial barriers, which is why we continue to provide this early financial support. And women remain underrepresented. We make up over half the population, but barely a third of the legislature. So that's where we're at this cycle. With that, I want to turn to the topic at hand, which is talking about the state budget. And I wanted to introduce everybody to our wonderful guest speakers. I was telling Pat West, the chair of our executive committee, right before we began, I said, I aimed high on this one. I asked for, who are the best possible people we could get to describe the budget? And thankfully, they both said yes. So I want to thank them both for joining us today. Speaker McClinton, who represents House District 191, that covers parts of Delaware and Philadelphia counties. We at Represent PA are proud and love to be able to brag that we have supported her since her very first run for office in 2015. Speaker McClinton has truly been a trailblazer for women in politics. She was the first woman elected to the House Democratic Caucus Chair in 2018. She was the first woman elected House Democratic Leader in 2020, and then the first woman to serve as Speaker of the Pennsylvania House in 2023, where she still presides. She holds a BA in political science and a Juris Doctorate. And then Felicity Williams is the executive director for Pennsylvania Policy Center, which, if you're not familiar with, it is a statewide Policy and Research Organization. She is the former Deputy Chief of Staff for the City of Pittsburgh, where she led a number of data-informed, equity-centered policy initiatives. And prior to that, she led economic development and communications at the Hill Community Development Corporation. Felicity holds a BA in economics and a Juris Doctorate. So as you can see, we are in really phenomenal hands regarding who is going to be describing the budget to us today. A couple of housekeeping items. Hopefully Speaker McClinton is on at this point. If she's not, we will first hear from Felicity Williams, but if she is, we will first hear from Speaker McClinton for about 10 minutes, and then we will hear from Felicity Williams. I ask that everybody keep themselves on mute, just so that we don't interrupt our speakers while they're talking. We want to hear your questions, though. So if something comes to mind and you have a question, please pop it in the chat. After our guests are done speaking, I have a few questions of a little moderated section, and then we will open it up to questions that everybody else has. So is the speaker here with us at this point?
Not yet, Gwen. We should
Not yet. Oh, okay. So if it's okay with you, Felicity, can we start with your presentation?
Absolutely. It is always better for me than to have to go after the speaker.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'm going to start your slide, and
Sure.
While you are speaking, I will reach out and find out what's going on with the speaker. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you guys for having me here this morning and for attending this morning to talk about what is a very, very important topic to us here in Pennsylvania, which is our budget, more specifically, the budget that was just passed a couple months ago. And so I'm excited to talk to you guys about what were some of the major wins in that budget, what is the scale of the remaining challenge, and what really comes next. Oh, wait, I don't think I have control of the slides. Thank you so much. I am going to go over what is some of the content on these slides, relatively high level, because I only have 10 minutes for this first portion with you all together. But I have shared these materials that can be distributed afterwards, as well as a couple links to some briefs that we have done as a team. Speaking of which, I also want to acknowledge that I do have a couple of my team members listening in on the call this morning. I'm really excited that they are here. I know at least Adrian and Laura from my team are, and Laura certainly helps support the research analysis, and then Adrian helps us communicate it out and make those graphics that you all might have seen. So with that, what I'm going to cover here with you all this morning. So we're going to talk a little bit about what passed, a little bit about where we started, where we ended, and an overview of the budget. We're then going to go into what are some of the key budget wins that we want to highlight. And of course, coming to this group, I also want to make sure I talk about women and reproductive justice. So we will spend a little bit of time on that, in addition to some of the other major wins that were in the budget. And then talk about what really is the scale of the unfinished work ahead of us and what comes next. So with that, we'll move on to the next slide here. So in short, this was largely a maintenance budget that preserved the status quo given rising costs and other pressures, with a few targeted investment exceptions. This is not uncommon to find in a divided government situation, but it is really important that we dig into some of where we were able to get some of the wins and where there's still a lot of work that we have remaining. We go to the next slide here. This will give you a relatively high overview. As I said, again, framing the budget around the fact that there was selective progress or investment, but really broad maintenance, even though the overall cost of the budget, the bottom line number, increased here from last year. In terms of some key areas where we maintained the floor, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, we're around ensuring that we did not have state level cuts to healthcare. So you'll see that we maintained for Medicaid, CHIP, and Penny. You'll see that we also maintained the Working Pennsylvanians tax credit. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And then in terms of areas where we actually invested more deeply, again, we'll dive into this a little bit further. Education is one of the clearest spaces that we received clear, new, targeted investment. That's very exciting. There's some other areas, though, that we will touch on. And the biggest piece I want to leave you all with here is that there are still some very major fiscal questions that remain. It is important to remember that we started this budget cycle with the governor's budget proposal that had about a $6.4 billion gap in it between revenues that they were projecting from existing revenue streams and the actual top line number that the governor had originally proposed. What encompassed that $6.4 billion gap? It was originally a $4.6 billion transfer from the rainy day fund. And then there were some new revenue streams that the governor had proposed that had not yet been approved. And so both of those were contingent. Both of those were structural gaps. As you can see, we balanced the budget. We managed to maintain the rainy day fund balance. So on one hand, that is great for the books and the math. But as we go to the next slide, you're going to see it's not so great for our fiscal future because this is how we managed to close that $6.4 billion gap. There were a lot of accounting measures that were taken. So for example, there were some special fund transfers. There was recapturing of some prior year lapses, so funding that was appropriated but was not spent in prior years. One of the biggest ones was shifting Medicaid cycle rolls. So thinking about that this way, what it means is not that we don't have to pay those bills in Pennsylvania. Think about it this way. If your mortgage was due in December and you said, instead of paying it in December, I'm going to pay it in January, because now I can look back and say that my year last year ended December but balanced and I budgeted well. But I still owe that bill in January plus all of the next year's bills. And so that is one of the biggest ways in which we were able to, one, maintain, not have any state level cuts to healthcare, but be able to balance our budget. And so it worked again on paper to get us to a balanced budget, but it is not great for our long-term fiscal future and sustainability. Next slide, please. I do want to also highlight here some of the dynamics around the process of how we got to a final budget. I think it's important to highlight here how the House really moved us through this process, having a budget approved as early as April 14th. And it was largely the governor's proposal, but it gave plenty of time for there to be negotiation and conversation with the Senate. Unfortunately, much of that did not start to occur until, at least substantively or meaningful negotiation, until we were almost at the deadline for our budget. And so that left very little time for some of those very serious and intense negotiations to occur. So we did have a relatively on-time budget, right? It will say about 2 weeks beyond the deadline, which is relatively on time for those of us in Pennsylvania, with a very condensed negotiating period. But the House really took a lot of leadership here. And I want to also highlight that the House, in that in-between period when the Senate was not engaging in those negotiations, really did advance a lot of priorities that ended up ultimately getting left out of the budget that I will highlight in some of the what comes next, because those are a lot of the things that are really going to drive affordability for folks and make this a Commonwealth really in which everyone has an opportunity to thrive. Next slide, please. So starting with our first major win here, as I said, education. Pennsylvania absolutely continued our commitment to our school funding remedy. Many of you will be aware of the court decision that said Pennsylvania's funding mechanism was unconstitutional. And so there was a committee that came together that decided what that gap looked like and what we needed as a funding formula to get us to a constitutional level, adequate education funding for Pennsylvania. We have now, for the third year in a row, added to that remedy and reduced that gap. So you'll see another $526.44 million has been added to that adequacy gap, now totaling over $1.5 billion that goes towards that adequacy funding each year in Pennsylvania. There was also some minor increases in basic education funding formula as well as the special education funding formula. And then some other additional education gains that you will see there on the slide. But of course, this is the biggest, clearest, new targeted investment in our Pennsylvania budget this year. And we're very excited to see that the commitment to education and to an adequate and equitable education for all Pennsylvanians has continued. For context, as we move into the next slide, I will share that still roughly about 70% of students in Pennsylvania do not attend an adequately funded school. We have over 300 school districts that are underfunded in Pennsylvania. And so while we are super excited about the progress that we have made, we still have a long way to go. As you will see on this slide, we're about 32% closed from that original gap. The number that was identified is saying if we get to this number annually, we will have adequately funded schools. The key piece about that, though, and I did share a link to a brief that we just did on this, is that that number doesn't take into consideration inflation. As we know, everyone, your household budgets, state budgets, we're all experiencing rising costs because of inflation. And so when you take, the longer it takes to close that gap, when we do it in pieces, the more inflation is going to add to that gap. So for example, right now, without accounting for inflation, the gap was only 3.3 billion left after this year's substantial investment. But now we're looking at about 4.14 billion if you account for inflation in terms of what that gap actually is. So great that we're getting this investment. It's just not going as far because of inflation. All right, next slide, please. What were some other wins in the budget? So as I said at the beginning, one of the important pieces here was that we maintained the status quo, that we maintained access to services given inflation and rising costs. So a couple key areas. While we were not able to get things like an increase to the minimum wage after 19 years where we are at the federal floor, which is extremely embarrassing for Pennsylvania, all of our surrounding states, even West Virginia, have a higher minimum wage than we do. That said, one way that we are able to address the affordability challenge in Pennsylvania is through things like the Working Pennsylvanians tax credit. That is putting money back in the pockets of working Pennsylvanians and increases household income. And so we are excited to say that that continued in this year's budget. Caveat to that is that Pennsylvania's match of the federal earned income tax credit, that's what our Working Pennsylvanians tax credit is actually much less, the 10% match, than many other states. Many other states do 30, 40, 50% match. And so there's certainly room for us to grow here as well. I also wanted to mention a couple other key areas before we move off this slide, and then I'm going to talk to you about that equation at the very top. We've also invested in chip-enabled EBT cards. This is going to help reduce skimming and benefit theft. So that was an important investment that was made in this year's budget. We also increased funding in mental health services, which is another important win here in this budget, as well as for our seniors and nursing home support. Before we move off of this slide, the one thing that I really want to highlight is this equation that you guys see here at the top. This is something that we have developed at Penn Policy as a way to talk about affordability in the term of a policy context. And so when we think about affordability, we know that it equals household income plus public supports minus essential costs. And that for each piece of that equation, there's policy, a lot of it which is held at the state and budget level, that can either improve or worsen those parts of the equation. And so just keep that in mind as we're going through the next couple slides that I got to get through here in the presentation. All right. Of course, talking to this group, I wanted to make sure that I highlighted a couple wins for women and reproductive health. The biggest win here you will see in the top left there was a historic $12 million increase, doubling the funding for rape crisis centers, as well as some supports around the third straight budget of free period products in schools, investments in maternal health screening, and then of course also our care economy and the child care workforce. There were some good investments and supports there as well. To be clear, a lot of that though around the child care workforce, even with increases, with inflation, it will be relatively flat funding. But again, it's ensuring that we do not decrease or lose access in those areas. So we can do more, but we made sure that we maintained the status quo. Next slide, please. The biggest piece, as I started out at the very beginning, is that there were no new revenue streams enacted in this year's budget. We know that we have a structural gap. Pennsylvania does not spend too much. In fact, if you look at the spending per person that Pennsylvania does in comparison to other states, we're right in the middle. We're right in the national average, and we're actually less than many of our surrounding states. What we do know we have a deficit in is the amount of revenue that we bring in per person. We also know that that revenue that we bring in is deeply unbalanced. We have an upside down tax system where working families fund the majority of our budget through things like sales and use taxes and personal income tax, while our corporations doing business in Pennsylvania are able to use loopholes and avoid paying a lot of taxes here that would support our state budget, as well as those with high income and wealth. And so there's certainly way more. That's a whole other session to dig into about ways that we can address that. But it is absolutely a issue that we have to address. I'm disappointed that we weren't able to address it this year, but hopefully next year, when it is going to become even more pressing for us to address it, we are able to do so. And why will it be more pressing? Because of federal cost shifts that are going to start to hit our state budget, unfortunately, because of changes at the federal level. Next slide, please. So in terms of what comes next, and this is my second to last slide because I want to make sure we save room for lots of questions from you all. And again, I'm happy to dig deeper on any one of these topics. We need to complete the school funding remedy. Again, we know that our system is unconstitutionally underfunded. We must fix that challenge. And so, again, I want to emphasize that it is so exciting to see that we have found bipartisan support to continue to advance school funding, but we are so far from being done. And we need to account for inflation. So that's a really important one. We can close that gap faster if we bring in new revenue streams and we start closing corporate loopholes and making sure that the wealthiest Pennsylvanians, our 23 billionaires that exist in Pennsylvania, are paying their fair share of taxes, which they currently aren't. We've got to start to prepare for federal cost shifts. So as an example, starting next year in next year's budget, because of H.R. 1, the one big beautiful bill, the one big ugly bill, whatever you want to call it, we are looking at an additional over $500 million in SNAP costs. That is between what we will have to pay in increased administrative costs because of that federal legislation and what we will now have to share in paying for the cost of SNAP benefits because of that federal legislation. And we need to find a way to be able to cover those costs. In addition, I want to add one note here that I think it really is the responsibility of Pennsylvania, not just to maintain the status quo given rising costs, but since the federal government has abandoned some of these key social safety net programs, I believe it is the responsibility for Pennsylvania to look at the tax giveaways that have been given at the federal level and recapture those dollars at the state level. It's not like those entities are going to be paying more in taxes because they're paying so much less at the federal level now. We're just going to recapture them at the state level and ensure that we are able to provide the supports that Pennsylvanians really need to thrive. So I want to make that note there about the preparing for the federal cost shifts. Connected to that is how we make affordability more durable. I'm almost done, I promise. Connected to that is how we make affordability more durable. Again, investing in some of those key areas like childcare, transit, wages that we were not able to make the substantial investments in this year because we just didn't have the revenue. That is what helps drive down costs for folks every day and makes Pennsylvania more affordable. And then lastly, the key piece of having the revenue to be able to do all of that. And with that, I will close out here on the next slide and take any questions that folks might have for me. And I know that the speaker also has lots of thoughts to share with you all as well.
Thank you so much, Felicity. To make sure, I think that we stay on, well, let me stop sharing my screen now. There we go. To make sure that we stay on time and get to hear from the speaker, we'll hold questions or take the questions after, if that's okay. Okay, so I think the speaker is with us now. Or I know Erin is her political director.
Good morning. Here she is. Good morning.
Oh, there you are. Okay. Yay. Thank you so much for taking, I know you have a million things on your plate. So I am just very grateful that you are taking some time to speak with us.
No, glad to be here, Gwen. Good morning, Represent. Good morning, Felicity. Thank you for that excellent presentation on how much we've achieved but most importantly, how much farther there is to go. I'm so grateful to everyone at Represent PA for bringing us together this morning. When we started this year's budget process, we were focused on answering one question: how do we make life more affordable for the people that we represent all across Pennsylvania? Because when I'm in my home right here in West Philly, or when I'm in Delaware County, which is literally across an invisible line, serving my neighbors there, people are not talking to me about what's happening in State House. They are not talking to me about what bills have passed. They are, however, talking to me about their child's school not having enough resources. Last week, we cut a ribbon at a beautifully refurbished and expanded recreation center in Southwest Philly. And some parents I was talking to afterwards, the dad said, you know, what is the government doing for my family? Like, you don't help anybody. And his wife was there. So I learned in just, a brief conversation with them that one of their children has autism and is not getting the supports that are necessary to support him at his current stage and level. And we were talking with a member of my district office team about, one-on-one is not the norm anymore, but there is supposed to be like about 2 to 3 students with one person to provide that type of support. And he said, well, my son's not getting any support. And I said, well, that is against the law. So we started talking about what the next steps would look like and how my office would connect to mom and dad today, to reach out to the school district of Philadelphia to provide them the resources of the Education Law Center so that they can understand what their rights are. But people are not only talking about how to make things more affordable, they're also talking about how much the food costs to feed their children, how much it is to have cool air. I'm looking at my ceiling fan. You can't see it in your home office, how much it costs to have cool air in extreme heat summer, one like we had all across the state. They're talking about what it is to find a good paying job in this economy, how when you're losing a job in this time, it's taking, for many more than 6 months to be able to get a landing spot at a next opportunity, and how to, of course, live in the communities that they love. And those were the priorities that we brought to the budget table. And as Felicity just highlighted so clearly, even with divided government, we doubled our 1 seat to 2 seats of a majority just last Tuesday in Butler County. But of course, our state Senate for the next 70 days at least is still under Republican control. Yet we were able to have a bipartisan budget without raising anyone's taxes and to make meaningful investments into the priorities that we share. And for me, the biggest one is education. I started out on Monday at the school, like where I live, there's a school 1 block over. I started out right there. People will say I give that school all the love, but it is my neighborhood school. I went on Monday to welcome our students back to school and to talk to the parents and to be on site with some of the nonprofits and faith institutions who were giving, extra hot breakfast and snacks and just trying to make it a point to celebrate the return of school and not dread it. But for too long in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and I have been in the same zip code all 44 years of my life, zip codes have literally determined the type of education that you receive. I can recall in the winter of 2003 applying to law school, the first line of my personal statement was that statistically, my zip code would not prepare me for a law school application, because that is a reflection of the types of schools in Southwest Philly, in my neighborhood in West Philly. And while we know that zip codes should not determine your outcome, your life ability to live, the longevity of your life, we appreciate our highest court in this state telling us what most of us already knew, which was that we were unconstitutionally funding schools. So our budget gives $565 million to the adequacy formula, and that is our third installment on making it more fair and more equitable, and that is so very important. My neighboring school district, I will be with them tonight. They start next week. We're doing a back to school resource fair with William Penn School District, which was the lead plaintiff in the school funding lawsuit. And we are, of course, focused on classrooms, but this budget also invests beyond classrooms. As was stated, we secured last year the Working Pennsylvania tax credit. So for the first time this year, 900,000 families got a check back, and we hope to be able to grow that tax credit so that there's more revenue coming when they do their taxes in the years to come. We invested more into childcare. We have heard from childcare providers how tough it is in this economy to keep teachers teaching our youngest learners. So we put another investment there, also in career and technical education, so that some students come out not just ready to work, but with all the skills and certificates needed to get right into the workplace. And our student teacher stipend program, my little cousin was over here last week, and she said, JoJo, I'm not sure what's going on with that. And I said, well, you have to call my office. We can call Thea, as she is an education major at her institution on the other side of the city. And so we want to make sure that our teachers, our future teachers, have what they need so that they're not working multiple jobs and they're able to adequately prepare their lessons and be in the classroom and do all those required hours. But we're also working with small businesses. Starting off on Monday, one of the office meetings I had in my office right up the street from here was with a small business owner who has mobilized hairdressers and barbers, unfortunately due to the pandemic, but they continue on in seeking out grants and support and making sure that the licensure laws are fair. What else are we investing on in this budget? Violence prevention, expanded money for the first time almost ever, and more support for rape crisis centers, which is such a place where there's so much trauma associated with those encounters. We don't want there to be fewer and fewer counselors. We want there to be more support, more investigations, more cases cleared. We invested again in mental health services, and it took 25 years, but for those retirees on the line, finally, give a little drum roll, we invested in a cost of living increase to so many retired teachers and retired police officers and retired firefighters who have just put themselves completely on the front line to take care of our children and keep us safe in our times of need. And those are real results. And I think we have to acknowledge them in the environment that we live, that we have divided government. We've only got a narrow margin. Republicans still at this time are in charge of the Senate, and we've got significant disagreements on what we see as the future of Pennsylvania. But a budget requires compromise. But compromise, of course, doesn't mean that we leave our values back in our district offices. But no, we take them to the Capitol. We stay at the table. We find the common ground necessary to deliver something meaningful. And I think that we have just seen in the last few days another reminder of why the work that we're doing in Harrisburg and why your investment matters so much. So many people saw the decision that came out on Monday regarding this administration's executive order about our elections, and people are appropriately concerned. But let me just say that we will still have the right to vote by mail without any impediment. Our law in Pennsylvania has not changed, and the fight in our courts to protect our elections hasn't ended. Our great governor, Josh Shapiro, has already pledged to continue on with the legal challenges. So we don't want anyone to panic. And we also don't want to ignore what this moment is telling us, which is what happens in Washington makes what we do in Harrisburg even more important. So there are some things that are beyond the boundaries of our legislature, but there's a lot of things that we can do. We can continue to protect mail-in ballots in 2019. We can continue to make sure that the folks administering our elections in all of our 67 counties have the resources necessary. And we can also make sure that we can have full faith in protecting our democracy. It's not only a courtroom fight. It's not only in Washington, but we are making sure that we're pushing back on all of the nonsense that's come out of Washington. And I also heard Felicity highlight the cuts that are coming December 1, thanks to the big, I call it the big ugly betrayal. Because of those cuts, we have to continue to use every tool available to stand up for the people that we represent. We've shown what we can do with our humble. We previously only had the 1-seat majority for 4 years. But when we are at the table, Pennsylvania are at the top of our agenda, and this budget shows more examples of that. And we're not done. We have about 9 session days left this school year, this legislative session, and it is with all of your help that will expand our majority in November, that we will flip the state Senate. And when we get back to Harrisburg in January of 2027, we must finally, after 20 years, raise the minimum wage. We have to pass my Voter Protection Act. That's a bill that passed out of the House in May of this year to make sure more Pennsylvanians have more access to the ballot, finally having early voting. We have to protect our access to health care, and we have to make sure that all of our neighbors are protected with the Fairness Act. So we don't want to ever be discouraged, intimidated, or sit this election out, but we're going to do everything in our power to protect your freedom. And we will need your support to make sure that all of our candidates, especially the hardworking women, thinking about Elizabeth Morrow and Hadley Haas and Sarah Adgerton and Tawanda in Cumberland, there are so many. I won't call all their names in this minute, but there are so many women who are running, Kristen and Buck, so many women that are running that need your support. And I can attest, being in the first cohort of supported women for Represent PA. Thank you, Christine. Way back in 2015, 11 years ago in a special election, what significant push and investment it does to have a second off the phones, because you know another check is coming. So you can spend those seconds on the doors. We're almost there. And with your investment, not only will we stay in charge as House Democrats, but we'll make sure that my friends in the state Senate are able to change the game. So all of the compromise that's had to happen in the past, it'll be a new level of compromise where we start off with agreement on most things and continue to move Pennsylvania forward. So thank you so much. I know there will be questions. I really appreciate your flexibility. Women, we think we can do it all. And I did make it to the gym this morning, but I was late for Zoom, so I'm so sorry. I apologize.
Oh, thank you so much. So we do have a lot of questions in the chat. I just wanted to ask one quick question. I know it's easy, we sit here. I'm not in Harrisburg. Most of us on the call are not in Harrisburg, and we look at the budget and we know there's lots of things to be done, but it's hard bringing people together. So I wanted to give you, Speaker McClinton, the opportunity to say what you're most proud of in this budget. And then Felicity, what do you think is the most exciting thing in this budget? And then I'll turn to some of the questions in the chat.
It's tough to minimize it down to one win, honestly. Oh. It's very tough for me. But, as I said, I'll be going to William Penn School District this evening after work to have a resource fair in conjunction with the school district. So I will be happy to announce, that they have an increase. Like, it is still not everything they need, but yet again, they have an increase, and that should support the school board's decision in not needing to raise any taxes for my neighbors who live in Yeadon and Darby, Lansdowne, Alden, all of the municipalities that make up and constitute that
Thanks.
district. You're on here.
I would have to say, the same one that Speaker McClinton did. I mean, when I think about the future of our Commonwealth, we think about our children and just how important education is to giving people opportunity. And so I think for me, the most exciting thing is to see substantial commitment for a third year, as Speaker McClinton said, with bipartisan support on education, public education specifically.
Wonderful. So we do have a lot of questions. I did see, and I know Speaker McClinton, you already kind of addressed this, but with this opportunity to flip the Senate, what can be next? I think you mentioned raising the minimum wage and do you want to speak a little bit more about that? Or maybe you've already mentioned the big ones that will get addressed.
Absolutely. So, it just completely resets everything. The fact that we have not had an on-time budget in this entire administration, it's no lack of leadership at all for Governor Shapiro. It is the Senate Republicans who every year just want to play games. The first year it went till December. The second year, it was the second week of July. Last year, it went until November. This year, it was still 12 days late. Just start talking about doing it at June 30th. That is something that won't be an obstacle. When the press last year was asking me, what's the holdup? I'm like, politics. Give me a microphone. Politics. The Senate Republicans want the governor to fail. That is why they refuse to do a budget on time every year, and Governor Wolf's last few were mostly just about on time. One was even earlier because there was some situations happening with the Senate Republican leadership, but just starting with the fact that they have not even been on time. They've not been on time, and that causes major heartburn, headache, and unfortunately for the lags, the ones that really went, William Penn School District had to take out a loan last year. They had to take their loan out in July so that they could make payroll for 3 months minimum. And then they had to take another one out with interest, and the state doesn't reimburse that. The rape crisis centers last year were laying off staff in October. So who's calling to get support in their time of need? So it's just starting with something as basic as the fact that it will be on time. There will be folks at the table running the state Senate that are not politically opposed to the governor. That is ludicrous. And then we think about the things that still haven't been resolved, like transit funding. That is not a Philadelphia issue. That is a statewide issue. We have multiple transit agencies across the Commonwealth that need sustainable, expanded investment. And we have not done the job. We think about the skill games that have yet to be regulated, but I don't want to talk. You said there's a lot of questions, so I'm not going to.
Well, you just answered one of them. Someone was asking about SEPTA. So you kind of, I guess, if we get the Senate funding for that, maybe will be easier, I guess.
Much easier. They've been no's for no reason. They said, oh, well, we want to see some accountability measures. We sent them a bill with everything they wanted last August. They never moved it. So, really ludicrous and unfortunate that they don't show up to do any work. And that is why we must defeat them in November.
Okay, there's a question here about horse racing subsidy. Any chance we can reroute those funds to education is the question for Monica Wenninger, running in House District 170.
So I'm not going to be able to answer questions like that in this hour. Okay. Because budgets require compromise. So I will not be telling you what's rerouted. I don't know. Let's get to this election.
That's fair. That's fair. Let's see. We have a lot of questions about SEPTA. Let's see can our speakers tell us how they can support SEPTA, whose funding has weakened recently. I guess there are a number of questions about SEPTA. So let's hope the Senate flips, but what if we're operating in a very narrow, like it's tied or something? Are there other plans or ways to help?
Gwen, it will be narrow. What do you guys think is happening? This is a red state with blue dots. It will be narrow. It will be narrow, but it will be compromised, and it will be better than what we've been dealing with for the 30 years Republicans have run the Senate and not done anything meaningful that we need on investment, on healthcare, on voting rights. But it will be moderate, but that's okay, because we've been humble and we've been audacious with one seat for almost 4 years. And look at how much we've done with one seat. This is not Pennsylvania turning into Maryland or New Jersey or New York. It will be modest. I don't want any of us to think that somehow in Pennsylvania, people, and we're looking full in the counties, are all getting defeated. I don't anticipate that. However, I do anticipate that in Bucks County, that in the Lehigh, that in Monroe, we can defeat those Republican incumbents. And Monco, I miss Monco. So, and keeping our Senator Malone in Lancaster, right? So it will be modest, but that's okay. It doesn't need to, we're not bringing in voters from Maryland or New York or New Jersey. That's okay, because with the Senate Republicans no longer running the calendar, no longer being at the budget, like they have been not only asleep at the wheel and obsessed with trying to set the governor up for failure, but completely derelict on the things that we can do. Look at what's happening with the skill games. It's outrageous. The court makes a decision. They give us a timeline. We don't fulfill it. Look at what happened with the life without parole decision. The court says a timeline. We don't fulfill it. There has been no meaningful sit down to compromise on those issues so that we can get bills to the governor's desk. So modest and humble. I'm not, look, it's okay. I'm here for it. We can do it.
Yeah. It sounds like, right, one of the best ways, even just to be able to take a vote on things, controlling that calendar. That's the thing. That would be a huge win. Okay, Christine Jacobs has asked how much money would be raised by getting rid of the Delaware tax loophole for corporations.
Yes. So you want to take that one, Speaker? I'm happy to take that one.
I don't have a talking point. Felicity.
Yes, love this one because I want to put it into a little bit of context. So, and I'll drop the link in the chat. We released an analysis on this earlier this year, given the conversations around the tax loophole. That is just one piece of what has been eroding from our corporate tax base in Pennsylvania over the last 2 decades. When you take into consideration the totality of changes and not closing that, we're looking at actually closer to 2.1 to 2.9 billion that Pennsylvania loses every year that we're not collecting from corporations doing business in Pennsylvania. To your question about the Delaware loophole, or what we call water's edge combined reporting, that would be the solution there. We believe that we can raise over, I think it's 328 or 334 million annually from closing just the Delaware corporate loophole. Now, to put into context, Pennsylvania is falling behind in this area. 28 other states plus DC have already closed that corporate loophole, the Delaware one. However, if we were to close our Cayman Islands or our Switzerland loophole, we could actually raise over $1 billion a year from corporations doing business in Pennsylvania. So think about it in this context, that your local coffee shop is paying all of their taxes, and Starbucks is sending some of their money, sheltering it across seas where they are not paying taxes on it. So closing the Delaware loophole will address those who are just multi-state corporations, but our multinational corporations will still be able to shift profits overseas. The only state that has implemented full-blown combined reporting, right, what we call beyond the water's edge combined reporting, is Alaska, and they did that specifically on the oil and gas industry. However, in those 28 states that I mentioned have closed at least the Delaware loophole, many of them have done Delaware loophole plus, where they also have some provisions that attempt to capture folks who shift profits offshore. So there's lots of opportunity here, and Pennsylvania is definitely falling behind in terms of our corporate tax base and really eroding it. And I want to add, we did the analysis. It has not led to increased economic growth in Pennsylvania. In fact, when you look at comparing Pennsylvania to the national economic growth, even when we have increases where national economic growth is growing, we're increasing at a slower rate than the national number. So I'll drop the link to that analysis as well. There's a lot of work we can do there with our corporations and corporate tax base.
Thank you. We have another question, if either of you want to address this, about a nonpartisan redistricting commission for PA. Is there an appetite to fund or do something like that?
I'll definitely leave that one to the speaker.
I was going to leave it to you. I like Democrats being in charge of the redistricting. I don't know what to tell you all.
That's fair.
When we
Uh,
finally
let-
got a chance to do it, we had competitive maps that led to a one-seat majority. What's wrong with that process?
yeah. Now a two-seat majority. Let's see. I can find one more question here before we wrap up. Okay, there's a question here from Peggy. What will it take to, in fact, raise taxes on the super rich, both individuals and corporations? Is that even thinkable in Pennsylvania? Can can the recapture that Felicity outlined become a reality?
So I'll tackle from my perspective, and then Speaker McClinton, I'm happy to have you add to this. And I think you're going to capture a little bit what I'm going to say. There is like the technical way that we can do, and is there a way to do that? Yes. And then there's the political reality, right, of how we have to get there. And so Pennsylvania Policy Center has put forth a proposal called a fair share tax, where we would, instead of taking the flat tax rate across each subcategory of income in our personal income tax, so there's 8 subcategories of income in our personal income tax, instead of just one flat tax rate, we would assign a uniform tax rate to each subclass. We propose cutting taxes on the subclasses that are wages or income from work, so wages, salaries, and interest. And we propose raising taxes on all of the other categories, aka income from wealth. Now, to be very, very clear, this will absolutely receive legal challenge. There are those who are going to say this does not comply with our state constitution. They're going to say it does not meet the uniformity clause. We disagree. Again, because there are already precedent within our tax code having 8 subclasses, and you can't carry losses from one subclass to the other, which means that those subclass distinctions are meaningful. We believe that we could make the case and that we could win. It would be a legal battle for sure to say that this does comply with our uniform tax code as long as whatever you earn in wages is a uniform tax rate, whatever you own in dividends is a uniform tax rate, etc. Again, now that's also the political dynamic context, which I'll probably leave Speaker McClinton to talk about, of how you actually get the votes to move something like this in Harrisburg, in a purple state, in divided government.
Yes, so it would require a great deal of compromise to be able to have the votes to do it. Because as we have seen governing for almost 4 years with one seat, you have to be able to move the bills. You don't want to just, call bills up and they fail. And that is a significant challenge. But I do know that one of the highlights for everyday Pennsylvanians, regardless of wealth or lack thereof, we have the lowest personal income tax in the region. Yet we have the highest corporate income tax in the region. So a lot of corporations choose not to headquarter here because of the incentives from Delaware and even Ohio. So we have to really, I wouldn't say walk a fine line, but we want to make sure we're not losing businesses, jobs, opportunities, and also not ever overtaxing working Pennsylvanians. One thing that I've always been for, that I know the Policy Center has advocated for and United Way has advocated for, is just setting a threshold where you don't even get taxed if you're, say, under $75,000 a person, because your amount that you're contributing to the state revenue is so small anyway, not insignificant, but it'd be a better investment economically for you to not have to pay that 3%. Why should you do it? Clearly, your neighbor a mile away in the big house that's making, 250 per person, is able to give more, to contribute more, and not feel the pain of this economic downturn turn that we're even in right now. When we talk about saving money, investing money, being able to get ahead, having a cushion, this constant tax on working people is not the solution or the answer. So I thank you to whoever was raising it. And I wanted to highlight, I know we're wrapping up soon on time, to Wanda Stallworth. I blanked on your last name. I didn't have it all in front of me, but I'm glad to see you here this morning. And thank you for your hard work in Cumberland County. And thank you, Represent, for supporting Tawanda in her race. We got to catch up earlier this week, and she's working hard. She's calling the folks, raising the money, knocking the doors to do what hasn't been done in decades in her community.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Speaker McClinton and Felicity Williams, for taking the time out of what I am sure is an extraordinarily busy schedule. So really, really appreciate you being here with us this morning. If you are a candidate on this call, please put your name and district, link to your website in the chat if you wish. There are so many women running this cycle. And as we spoke of earlier, we really have this unique opportunity to expand our House majority. Not crazy, not New York, we know, but even a few extra seats is going to make a big difference. And of course, if we can take the Senate, all of these things that we get really excited about as Democrats talking about can start to become a reality, things that now we might be able to actually take a vote on. Thank you all for your support. I'm going to very quickly share my screen here and let you know what is coming up, because in this moment where we have more districts and we have more women running, that means we need more resources, and all of the women running need more resources. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Hopefully. Okay, so next month, we are going to be talking about voter protection with the Pennsylvania Democrats. I don't know about you, but every September, especially now with mail-in ballots, I start to get a level of anxiety. Can I vote by mail? Is it safe? Is there anything new that I need to know about? My oldest is going off to college. I like reminders about, if you have to vote by absentee ballot. So they'll be here with us next month to answer all those questions and go over, even actually, if you're interested in becoming a poll watcher, how you can do that. In October, we're going to hear the latest research for the Center for American Women in Politics. And then in November, we will have an election recap. I'm an optimist, but I don't want to be unrealistic, but I'm hoping we have a very happy November. And so a couple of ways to support us. We have in-person events coming up. I keep saying it, we have these districts that can win. We saw what happened out on the other side of the Commonwealth in Butler County in a Trump plus 18 district. Brandon Dukes won. Does that mean that all districts that are, that difficult on paper are going to win in November? No, but it means that districts that are challenging on paper could win if they get the right support. And because Represent PA is often the largest single donor to some of those more challenging races, we have an opportunity here to really make the difference in some of these campaigns. So on September 16th, we're going to be in Center City. We've got Rep. Missy Serrato, who is known as 102, I think, won her race just after the election, which then got Speaker McClinton the gavel the first time, thankfully. We'll be joined by Aline Albiar, who is running in Senate District 6, who there is no path to flipping the Senate without her winning. And then Elizabeth Mora running in one of the most competitive, likely to flip districts in Chester and Delaware counties. And September 17th, we will be at Kim Ramsey's house, who was also on this call this morning. We'll be joined by Mary Jo Daly, who is retiring, Stacey Gerlach, and Margaret Burke, who was also on this call this morning. Other ways to stay involved: check out our website, share it with friends, attend a breakfast briefing. They're free. You don't have to leave your home. You can stay in your PJs. We won't know. Host an event for us. If you were inspired and interested in helping us raise towards all of these wonderful women running, please reach out to me. If you have an idea for a breakfast briefing, it's maybe something you think we should be talking about, please reach out to me. You can join our endorsement committee. That's generally a commitment of either $100 a month or $1,200 for the year. And you can then be a part of how we're going to allocate funds moving forward. Join our mailing list and, of course, donate. So with that, it's 10:01. Look, we're only a minute over. Thank you all so much for being with us this morning. Take care.